Everybody loves Venice. Literally everybody sometimes. On occasion it's hard to move for tourists stumbling round, often lost, wondering what they're seeing. But this is the Piazza San Marco, so it's only to be expected. The hordes tend to go to the places they're directed, San Marco and the Rialto usually, with a gondola ride on the side. But oh, there's so much more to this extraordinary city. And there's darkness too. Here is Richard Armitage narrating the opening of the Medici murders for the audiobook from W.F. Howes.
The morning I was summoned to unravel a murder was bright and icy and full of pigeons. They were everywhere as I walked from my home in Dorsoduro, across the Accademia Bridge, through San Marco, and past the cafes in the piazza, where a grey and busy flock kept buzzing a group of carnival goers foolish enough to eat their pastries outside. The Romans feared the owl, Edgar Allan Poe, the raven. An old farmer I knew when I was a child in Yorkshire used to claim a robin flying into the house foretold a coming death, unless it happened in November, in which case you might live. Pigeons, rats with wings, are perhaps too common, too greedy and annoying to be portents of death. In any case, they were late to the party. The corpse was on the slab already, which was why I was making my way across Venice that February day, all too aware of the noisome creatures flapping and pecking around me. It almost felt as if they were cooing a warning. This is carnival, icy cold, full of strangers hiding behind masks. Nothing here is real or settled, fixed or safe. Beware.
The Venetian Republic was an extraordinary state, built on islands and palaces that rose on tree trunks embedded in mud to command a large part of the Mediterranean for centuries. But it was built on blood too, and this is about two linked assassinations 11 years apart that lie at the heart of my story. It's not a historical tale, but a tale sparked by history. So please join me as we walk in the footsteps of murder. But first, a diversion of nearly 5 centuries and a journey across Italy to a freezing January night in Florence in 1537. Not that there was such a country as Italy at the time. Instead, it was divided into states that were mostly run by warlords posing as monarchs, or a quarrelsome pope in Rome. Florence was ruled by the 26-year-old Duke, Alessandro de' Medici, a swarthy fellow whose mother, rumour had it, was either an African servant or a Roman peasant, and his father either the grandson of Lorenzo the Magnificent or another Medici, Giulio, who later rose to the throne of the Vatican as Pope Clement VII. There's no keeping those Medicis down, but there were rather a lot of them, and the offspring of one of the more obscure lines, Lorenzino de' Medici, was, on the surface, a chum of his distant cousin, the Duke Alessandro, but beneath his bitter enemy. That January night, Alessandro, a young man renowned for both his arrogance and his sexual appetite, had been lured by Lorenzino to a private apartment with the promise of an assignation with a beautiful widow the Duke had long fancied. He went in alone, lounged back on the bed, awaiting a pleasurable evening, only to be attacked by a murderous Lorenzino and an accomplice. The Duke of Florence fought back and managed to bite off part of Lorenzino's finger, but 2 against 1 with daggers were poor odds, and soon he was brutally stabbed to death. Now, Lorenzino would tell all and sundry that he killed Alessandro to free Florence of a tyrant's rule, just as Brutus had murdered Julius Caesar to save Rome. He then took to his heels, fleeing the revengers he surely knew would be after his own blood. Venice and Florence were powerful states at this time, sometimes allies, sometimes rivals. At this point it was very much the latter. The Medicis were intent on making themselves hereditary lords of Tuscany, monarchs in all but name. Venice was proudly republican, changing its own duke, the Doge, on the basis of a vote of its high-ranking nobles. No kings or hereditary dukes for the city in the lagoon at all. At odds, coveting the same territories on the mainland, the two simmered in open enmity, with Venice giving safe passage and sanctuary to any Florentines who'd fallen foul of whichever Medici held power over the Signoria. Perhaps inevitably, Lorenzino made his way there, and settled in so much he began an affair with a beautiful married aristocrat, Elena Barozzi, and fathered a child, a settled fellow, the past behind him, or so he thought. In 1548 he was living here in the Campo San Polo, a large square still given over to festivities at carnival time, and site for a charming winter ice rink too. The word polo has nothing to do with horses or mint, by the way. It's Venetian for Paul. This is the square of St. Paul. On the 26th of February, Carnival was over. The Campo, then bare earth without today's cobblestones, had seen plenty of action. Men on horseback, Lorenzino among them, dressed as a woman for Carnival, some said. He had, you suspect, become a little lax about his own security, since he'd failed to notice that for a good 2 weeks he'd been tailed by a couple of thugs from outside, who had murder on their minds. One of the most remarkable aspects of this tale is that we have first-hand accounts of what happened during this time. Lorenzino penned his own so-called apology for the murder of his cousin, though in truth it's not much of an apology at all, more a high-minded argument that tyranny deserved to be put down by murder if necessary. The same cannot be said for the far racier and more readable account that is passed down to us from the other party in this story, one written in a very identifiable thuggish voice by the man who wielded the dagger that took Lorenzino's life that February night, Francesco Biboni. He took great pride in recounting how he and his fellow assassin lied and stole and murdered their way into Venice in the first place, how they tailed Lorenzino for days, at one point being about to attack but calling it off at the last moment. Both men knew the risks they were taking. Venice was protecting Lorenzino, and anyone who attacked him would be headed for the dungeons and the torture chamber of the Doge, and then execution between the twin columns of the Piazzetta outside the palace. But determined they were, and that February night they lurked in the shadows of Campo San Polo, hanging around outside a cobbler's, watching Lorenzino's home. When he appeared in the window, looking as if he was dressed to go out, perhaps for an appointment with his mistress, Elena Barozzi, they checked their weapons and waited. Thanks to Biboni's account, we can recreate precisely what happened next and follow Lorenzino to his death, step by step. The doomed fellow duly appeared in the street, along with another Florentine exile, his uncle, Alessandro Soderini, and the two men crossed over to the local church of San Polo, stopping there briefly for reasons we don't know. Biboni and his mate duly followed when they reappeared and began to walk the way we do now, southwest towards San Tomás. I have to be honest, I was writing much of this book during lockdown when I couldn't get out of my home, let alone travel to Italy. So much of my scene setting took place on Google Street View until finally the curfew lifted. You can walk every step online if you want, and it's well worth a try, though not the same as the real thing. After a little while, we take a left and head towards the Grand Canal, then a sharp right by a charming little local cafe. Not that they knew it, but by the time Lorenzino and his uncle reached this point, they were dead. Ahead is an ochre palace, mostly in shadow on this side. It's now known as the Casa Goldoni, a museum dedicated to the Venetian playwright Carlo Goldoni, who was born there in 1707. But in 1548, the place was called Cacentani, home to a rather fey Venetian aristocrat and failed poet Antonio Zantani, who just happened to be the cuckolded husband of Lorenzino's mistress, Elena Barozzi. Had our fugitive Florentine come to see his girlfriend? Did his assassins pounce while he was waiting at the door? We don't know. All the murderous Biboni tells us is that he and his accomplice pounced when Lorenzino was by the small, low bridge, the Ponte San Tomás. Biboni's accomplice raced ahead and blocked the bridge. Biboni told Soderini to clear off. It wasn't him they wanted. But the old man was up for a fight, grabbed him, began to yell for help. A bloody struggle ensued, Soderini limping off wounded, Bibone grateful he was wearing double chainmail beneath his jacket, given the number of sword blows he took. It ended when, in his own words, he swiped Lorenzino's hand off, and then, the stricken man begging for mercy, finished him with a strike to the head. His uncle would be dead within the day, possibly from a poisoned blade. What next? Bibone tells a rogue tale of evading the Venetian militia, fleeing in a gondola from the tip of Dorsoduro to right outside the Doge's dungeons across the Bacino San Marco, and then escaping their pursuers and finally finding themselves free back on home territory. He died in bed at an advanced age, which is rare in this tale, but what he doesn't reveal is who put him up to the assassination in the first place. And there is the kernel of my story. A pompous TV historian, Marmaduke Godolphin, has decided he knows the answer, and it's not what people have thought for centuries. The narrator of this tale, Arnold Clover, a newly widowed and retired archivist just moved to Venice, is hired to back up Marmaduke's findings, only for the historian to be found dead in the costume of the Doge in the water by the Ponte Santa Mar, where Lorenzino was murdered 4.5 centuries before. As I said, I started writing this story in lockdown, and one of my aims was to give readers the chance to visit this remarkable city and experience its checkered history vicariously. I hope this brief walk in the doomed Lorenzino's footsteps helped. But one last mystery remains. What happened to his body afterwards? Minor noble he might have been, but he still surely deserved a marked grave. I can't offer a firm answer, only a local rumour, and for that we need to walk on from Santa Mar just a short way until we find ourselves outside one of Venice's greatest churches, the imposing Santa Maria Gloriosa dei Frari, or Frari as it's better known. Arnold Clover's bachelor apartment is close by, and so is much of his work, because in the Medici murders he finds himself deeply engrossed in the mass of historical documents preserved by the Venetian Republic over the centuries. Many are housed in the Archivio di Stato, the state archive in this former religious building next to the Frari, where much of the work Arnold and his Venetian friend Luca Volpetti takes place. Frari may be a great Venetian church, but inside there's a chapel paid for by Florence, with a statue of John the Baptist by Donatello, one of the city's greatest sculptors. The rumour is that the bloody corpse of Lorenzino was secretly buried under the cobblestones here at night. And finally, here are 2 locations I'm always asked about with Arnold's books. The Carabinieri station of his friend and occasional taunter, Capitano Valentino Fabbri, in San Zaccaria. Here it is next to the church it's named after, just behind the busy San Marco waterfront. And then there's the bar where Luca introduced Arnold to the adventure of the Medici murders, the Osteria ai Pugni, by the Pugni Bridge near San Barnaba in Dorsoduro. A lovely spot, though not quite as local as it used to be. I think some people blame me for that. Anyway, if you don't mind, I'll pop in for a Campari spritz right now and check.